Chapter 46. Celine somehow recovered from the incident. She spent the next few days in her chambers and sometimes breathed in fresh air from the remote garden with the help of Zayden. Throughout her journey to recovery, the second prince was her caretaker and mended her wounds. Meanwhile, Hala brought her meals and books, accompanying her whenever Celine was bored. She felt slightly awkward for surviving, especially since she had confessed her past life to Prince Zayden. She convinced herself that Prince Zayden probably thought she was spouting nonsense. When he never brought that topic up, she wondered if that exchange was only a hazy dream. The days were peaceful, and she spent long walks with the second prince. It reminded her of the days where she spent quality time with him when they were younger. Celine had also rekindled her friendship with Hala, and Yasna frequently paid a visit despite her growing belly. One day, when Celine decided to take a walk by herself, she witnessed a dreadful event. The day was already ominous, for the air around her was too quiet. Rumors of the emperor's sudden illness had reached her ears, and she wondered how his sons felt. She spotted the second prince and wanted to scare him as he walked towards the place where she stood. Celine hid behind a pillar, anticipating his arrival. However, Zavia appeared from the shadows, approaching the second prince with a confident, determined smile. Celine could objectively see how Zavia was a rather earthly beauty. Her unruly curls complemented her brown skin, and she seemed to hold certain, soft features that marked her as a wise, gentle woman. Zavia's round eyes resembled a puppy, while Celine's fox eyes resembled a cat's. Still, noble women were rigorously trained to be the epitome of elegance until the graceful movements was second nature to them. However, Zavia was still receiving her lessons, and one could see the lack of poise in her posture. How did Zayden ever fall in love with that mess? She hid behind a pillar as Zavia deliberately fell near the second prince and grasped onto his tunic. Zayden frowned and slapped her hands away before continuing to walk onwards. Celine held in her laugh. However, Zavia continued to cling on to the hem of his long dress. You dare insult the second prince? Let go! He yanked her away and Zavia fell to the marble floor. Wait! She yelled frantically. Prince Zayden finally met her brown eyes and froze. Celine frowned as Zavia slowly curled her lips upward. What's happening? Reject her again. Do what you usually do. In Zayden's perspective, he froze at the sight of Zavia's pupils, which seemed to possess an ominous glow in them. A chill ran down his spine. His body instinctively wanted to run away from this troublesome woman. Even red stirred in his shadows with alertness. He quickly recovered and looked away towards the garden, where Celine should be. It was Zavia's turn to frown. Zavia then whispered so quietly that Celine was not able to hear the words. Whatever she had uttered infuriated Zayden, for he grasped Zavia's neck. I cannot be so easily fooled like your prince. Your tricks will never work on me. He tightened his grip and squeezed. Despite his violent action, he moved effortlessly. He looked almost bored as he pushed her into the air as if she was weightless. Zavia's eyes widened in shock, her mouth hanging open as she struggled to breathe. Even Celine's mouth turned into an O shape. His sudden show of strength shocked her. Celine immediately ran towards the scene and pulled them apart. Zayden, release her. What are you doing to your brother's concubine? She yelled. Zayden was still angered, glaring at Zavia with a murderous intent. Harming her is not worth whatever she said to you. Let go! Celine hissed, looking around to see if there were any witnessed. She relaxed as she realized this was a remote corner, where only servants and guards had access to. Nobles were not allowed to visit this area unless they were given special permission. He finally released her to the floor, where Celine could finally yank his arm away. Zavia fell into a coughing fit, while Zayden stared into Celine's eyes. His pupils showed a flicker of emotion, and he fixed his gaze towards the delicate hands clasping his wrists. Go cool off. I'll handle this, Celine finally said. She was glad Zayden didn't fall for her, which would have led to a terrible ending. However, the second prince strangling the crown prince's concubine would also not end well. But just go! Celine cut him off with a cold glare. Wait for me at the pavilion. Zayden finally walked away, his face tangled in different emotions. He obeyed her due to his guilty conscience. When his figure became smaller, Celine finally faced Zavia. How is this possible? How was he able to resist me? Zavia breathed. She was dazed, not even paying attention to Celine. Celine was disgusted by her words and wanted to scorn her. Are you not content with the crown prince? How dare a lowly concubine seduce his little brother? The second prince is not an object. He's not someone you can easily seduce. Zavia sneered, rolling her eyes in annoyance. Why can't I have both? She lifted herself and leaned into Celine, lowering her voice. Isn't that what you're doing? Don't be so hypocritical, Lady Kalina. She fell back down again as if she was pushed. Before Celine could react, the crown prince happened to witness the exchange. Celine wanted to laugh as she realized what the situation would be misunderstood for a brawl between the crown prince's jealous fiancé and the favored concubine. Arrest Sir Villiga's daughter for laying a finger on my woman. His voice thundered throughout the hall. Servants who happened to walk by quickened their pace, and the sound of shuffling feet filled the tense air. Guards quickly flanked to her side and seized her arms. Celine flinched as the wound in her stomach was not completely healed. She was still sensitive to touch. I did no such thing, Your Highness. Let's all take a step back and... Celine was not able to finish her sentence, for Prince Leith slapped her cheek. He motioned for the guards to take her away, escort her to her room and don't let anyone in. Celine could only stare at the crown prince. She could barely feel the sting on her cheeks or the blood trickling down her nose, for the anger and frustration for being wrongly accused consumed her. Her left eye twitched as Zavia broke into pitiful tears, leaning into the crown prince for comfort. Esebel ne dia mwil hananji molarasio badninjalana, bayong sensible segi. Not going to translate this, he. Just know that she was cursing him out in Korean. The guards glanced at one another as they dragged Celine away, who continued to curse in an unrecognizable foreign language. If they understood her words, she would certainly be killed on the spot for treason, which gave her a small sense of victory. Chapter 47. What do you have to say for yourself, Celine? After escorting Zavia to safety, the crown prince immediately marched back to Celine's chambers. I didn't touch her. Celine grit her teeth and crossed her arms. She was surprised by the Prince Leith's sudden aggressiveness, yet she didn't bother to contemplate why he was suddenly cold to her. You are wrongfully confining me, Prince Leith. Will you be able to handle the repercussions of imprisoning a general's daughter? The two glowered at one another. Don't use General Villiga's name to clear your faults. I am already aware of your estranged relationship with him, he retorted. Celine paused. If you knew that I wouldn't be politically useful, then why would you still want to be engaged with me? She remained silent, for she didn't care to hear the answer. Celine knew that the crown prince was biased and that their conversation wouldn't be very rational. She didn't bother to reply, since her opinions would most likely be ignored. The crown prince's mind was a blank slate with only one purpose in mind. Despite this mental state, he couldn't control the words that flew out of his mouth. He was unknowingly swamped with spiteful vehemence. Did you know I always loved you? He seemed to wince in pain for a split second, yet the movement was too swift for Celine to think anything of it. Prince Leith spoke quickly, as if he only had limited time to speak. I held you in my heart as I conquered Krastia. I found the ring you asked for, and I returned to the capital immediately to see you. I was looking forward to our reunion. How have you been? What troubled you while I was gone? What did you do every day? I wanted to ask you so many questions, but when I returned, you seemed to have opened your heart to another man. My brother, he addressed his brother with a detested look, and Celine gaped at his sudden confession. She was stunned, studying Leith's expression, which wasn't in line with the shocking words. It seemed as if the crown prince received another headache, for he grunted slightly and massaged his temples before continuing. That's when I knew you never once loved me. The way you looked at him. Your smile was honest and filled with joy. I had never seen you smile like that. Did you know? Even as a child, your heart was cold. You never told me how you sincerely felt. Your smile stopped before it could begin to form, but I still loved you. Even now, I tried to give you a chance. I would have thrown her away if you even showed me a single ounce of emotion. How can you say that? The marriage. How can you break? The words were stuck in his throat, and his expression looked as if his mind was at war. Celine frowned at his stumbling words. Do you still love me? He shook his head violently. The headache seemed to have washed away for a split second, and a rush of words automatically left his mouth. Xavier was the first person I chose of my own accord and will. Our engagement wasn't of our own choosing, and I knew you never loved me. You were only trying to comfort me. You only pitied me. I gave her the jade ring because I love her now. Prince Leith stared at her numbly, his voice resolute. Despite Prince Leith's firm expression and discourteous tone, his eyes seemed to betray his emotions. Know that, you betrayed me first. I will annul our engagement since the Emperor is sick, as you might have heard from the rumors. He paused before continuing. You will depart tomorrow, and this will be the end for us. Celine gaped at the prince, confused by his contradicting words and the facial expressions he had displayed just now. However, she couldn't analyze his speech, for she was still stuck on his confession and her banishment. She never considered the possibility of Leith bringing home another woman to make her jealous simply because the small book had left out such a significant detail. However, most of what Leith had claimed was true. When she first entered this world, Celine was still Yan Wu, grieving the loss of her family and adapting to the new lifestyle. It was too early for her to reciprocate Leith's feelings when she still loved another man and simultaneously paranoid for the future. All she could think about was gaining his favor and trying to make him fall in love with her. She had approached him with selfish intentions while Leith was genuine and sincere. Celine didn't hate Leith either. She only cared for him like she would a small child. Like any responsible adult, she placed a careful filter over herself, which was far different from her times with Zayden. The second prince appeared at a time when her sorrows were pacified, when she could finally live in the present again. In a way, Celine did betray the crown prince. Leith and Celine gazed at one another, their bittersweet memories unfolding right before them. One considered their memories to be the happiest point of his life, while the other considered it to be a fever dream. She felt like a heartless woman, yet there was nothing that could be fixed now. Eventually, Celine managed to reply with an uneven voice. Her tone was soft, yet filled with despair and guilt. Back then, we were too young, we were only children. You did have a special place in my heart, Prince Leith. Celine's heart ached at the sight of the crown prince shaking his head. He didn't believe her, yet she continued to show him her honest feelings. It is not a lie, for you were very kind and warm, even as a child. You were like a son. How could I not love you when we only had each other? Even if it wasn't the type of love you wanted, I still loved you. I also don't love the second prince romantically. I practically raised Prince Zayden after saving him from the brink of death. There truly is no intimate relationship between us. It was a big misunderstanding that could have been resolved if we communicated. Celine lowered her head to avoid his piercing stare. The crown prince was on the verge of tears, and he couldn't understand why he felt as if he had made a big mistake. His heart was empty, yet the words stirred the depths of his soul. It felt as if something in his head wanted to break free, but it was locked securely. He never responded, and the Celine took that as a cue to continue. I will leave tomorrow morning. I had been preparing for departure anyway. She couldn't finish her sentence, because she suddenly burst into tears. Celine couldn't believe he was asking her to leave tomorrow, yet she didn't want to argue anymore. I truly am sorry. I apologize for everything I put you through. She couldn't control the pain in her heart and buried her face in her hands. She cried for the what-ifs in their life, and the injustice between them. The crown prince seemed too pitiful in her eyes. If we had met under different circumstances, if I never read that book, or if you hadn't gone to war, perhaps then, we could have been together and I would have definitely fallen in love with you. The heavy silence ensued again, and she sniffled her tears. I guess this is really the end for us, Celine murmured. I pray that you become a wise emperor who will be remembered thousands of years in the future. I wish you happiness and prosperity, Your Highness. She attempted to sound encouraging, yet her words felt pathetic even to her. She was depressed by the conversation. Prince Leith was practically her childhood friend, and one of the few people in Celine's life. Although he was an annoyance when he returned from war, she would never forget such a handsome face. Although she refused to openly admit this secret, she was honored to guide a future ruler. From an objective point of view, the crown prince had grown up well. For a split second, Prince Laith's expression contorted horrendously. He completely covered his head with his hands as if to suppress the throbbing pain. He felt as if his brain was compressed with immense pressure. His face was blank, then filled with emotions the next second before returning to its original poker face. Prince Laith, are you okay? Celine believed that the prince was currently suffering from migraines. Please take care of your health, your highness. Improve your sleeping habits, modify your diet, and don't be too stressed. Don't speak so kindly to me like that and leave before I change my mind, Laith stammered. His voice broke as he whispered, just go. He buried his face in the palm of his hands, leaving Celine in an awkward position. She would never know what he was truly experiencing. She would never know that there was a war inside the crown prince's head. Prince Laith. Live well. Although they were currently in Celine's chambers, she decided to leave the room instead. She took in the side profile of the beautiful prince once more, engraving him into her memories. Goodbye, Crown Prince. Chapter 48. The conversation afflicted Celine more than she thought it would. She was completely somber and feeling rather anguished, as if she had just been broken up with. Well, we did break up. She felt slightly melancholy, yet the emotions were mixed with excitement for her future. Celine didn't want to look back or think about the Crown Prince again, especially since she would be leaving the Zayden Empire tomorrow. She tried to push away her guilt, reminding herself that there was nothing she could do now. Draco had returned to her side this morning, and there was a home waiting for them in Krastia. Her future was set in stone, and there was no time to sulk. According to her familiar, her late husband's doppelganger was not an assassin. He was paid to join the attack due to his bigger build. Since his mother was ill, they needed the extra money for medicine. He was currently residing in the outskirts of the capital, waiting to return to Krastia with the help of Celine. We're finally leaving, Draco, she exclaimed. She had planned for this exact moment, and the journey had been so long and strenuous. Now Celine was rather exhausted and couldn't register the idea of leaving when this moment finally arrived. Celine truly yearned for modern music to cheer her up on this particular day. Her feet led Celine towards the pavilion, and she hummed the lyrics to one of her favorite songs. As she approached the garden, Celine looked up to see the cloudy skies and knew it would be pouring soon. She turned around and stopped abruptly, realizing that Zayden was waiting for her in the garden. There's no way he waited this long. She quickened her pace as she noticed the outline of a young man. Droplets of rain fell on her cheeks, and the air turned crisp. Zayden. Why are you still out here? It's about to rain, she ran up to her friend. His familiar presence immediately brought her a sense of reassurance. Her worries and stress seemed to dissipate, which alarmed Celine to the point where she stared at Zayden intensely. I was only waiting for you, he spoke softly, gazing at the tiny droplets of water on her eyelashes. The light rain began to pour, blurring the surrounding area. However, Celine's silvery hair was luminous and her porcelain skin glistened iridescently. The outline of her colorful eyes penetrated Zayden's soul as she stood out even in the rain. Celine also observed Zayden, completely drenched in the rain. His raven, black hair was completely flattened and covering most of his eyes. Dressed completely in black, Celine could only make out his pale skin and the sharp outline of his narrow jaw. The rippling sound of the falling rain was deafening as the completely soaked pair never took their eyes off one another and continued to stare wordlessly. Do you like me? Celine finally asked. Her voice was slightly washed out by the sound of rain, yet Zayden could hear her crystal clear. Yes. Celine couldn't hear the rain anymore. The world seemed to pause for her, and Celine sucked in her breath. Why? Why? Zayden paused, flustered by the sudden question. His eyes flickered deeply. Because your heart is kind. You took an apathetic, weak boy like me. You showed me what humans should be like. I always learn how to better myself when I'm with you. Zayden couldn't find the right words to say and stuttered profusely. Celine noticed the blush forming on his high cheekbones and frowned. They were the words she didn't want to hear. The Crown Prince loved her for the same reason. Don't be delusional, Celine interrupted. You love me because I took care of you? Because I was the only decent human being around you? The right attention during a lonely time can fool you into thinking that they might be the one. You're momentarily confused and mistaking your feelings for me as love. When you grow older, you'll realize that I was more like your teacher. Celine didn't want to reject Zayden this harshly, yet she didn't want his feelings to grow anymore. She wanted him to stay by her side as a friend. Zayden's eyes widened in confusion as he didn't expect to hear such a response. He quickly attempted to refute her words yet didn't know how to respond. He could only look at her with a troubled expression. What's wrong with liking someone who was always there for you? That's not what I'm saying. Our age difference and the fact that I view you as my little brother. We just can't be together. Practically speaking, I can't return your feelings since you are the second prince. And I'm the crown prince's ex-fiancée who will be kicked out of this country tomorrow. She couldn't bring herself to tell him what had transpired with the crown prince just now. She couldn't ask Zayden to run away with her either. Celine knew he would follow her and that there was no one here who would truly accept him, yet the words refused to leave her mouth. An onset of nervousness overwhelmed her, and the words died at her tongue. Her cheeks began to redden in embarrassment, as she realized that it would be weird to ask him to follow her to Krastia after thoroughly rejecting him. She told herself that she'd ask tomorrow, hours before her actual departure. Little did Celine know that she would later regret not asking Zayden that day. Chapter 49. Hala, how would you respond if I asked you to run away with me? Celine began to undress herself as Hala filled the tub with warm water. Hala was neither surprised or concerned as she answered immediately. I would gladly follow Lady Celine to the ends of the earth. Who would treat me better than my beautiful master? Celine caught Hala's wrist, holding her in place. I'm serious. I'm serious too. Hala smiled sheepishly, and Celine blushed slightly from the honest praise. She lowered her voice, then finally proposed a plan. Then gather all of your belongings and return to my room. You will leave on Draco's back as soon as you return. He will take you to the outskirts of the capital, where a man will be waiting. I will soon join you in the morning after I say my farewell. Hala's eyes widened in shock. Now. Yes, do you have anything to pack? She shook her head quickly. No, I don't even have a family here. I was just surprised by the timing. Why must we leave so quickly? The crown prince annulled our engagement. He told me to leave tomorrow. Celine shrugged and stepped into the warm bath. Poor master. Although I believe you would be a wonderful empress, the first felt as if you were destined to change the world. Being an empress would hold you back, and I feared that the political schemes would extinguish your flame. Hala smiled. However, Celine pretended to not notice her trembling hands. Hala, if you like it here, you may stay. No, Hala widened her eyes. I'll go where you go. No one has treated me better than you. I think of you as family. She blushed from her own shamelessness. Celine only chuckled and smiled warmly. I also consider you to be my family. That is why you should leave now, Hala. I'm afraid that they will not allow you to accompany me, or send someone else. I'll cover for you in case anyone notices your absence tonight. I'll be too excited to sleep anyways. Yes, I'll go right now, Hala squealed and left in a hurry to retrieve her baggage. The two smiled at one another, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they imagined the adventure ahead of them. The past year had been eventful for Celine. She felt rushed and wholly unprepared. However, if she doesn't leave now, when would she ever leave? She reminisced her life in the palace and was reminded of Oren. She did not care about her biological parents here, yet she would deeply miss those round cheeks of her stepbrother. Celine frowned as she thought of Lady Yasna, the only female friend who had truly made her feel less lonely. She realized she would never meet Yasna's newborn. I'll frequently exchange letters with Yasna and Oren. Celine tried to remain optimistic, thinking of ways to stay in touch with her friends. She immediately felt reassured with her plans, believing that life would only get better from here on out. On to new beginnings, Celine murmured. Meanwhile, Zayden was in agony that same night. He stayed up late, racking his brain to find the perfect words to convey his feelings and properly confess. He was too distracted to notice the shadow of a slender figure slipping into his room. The next morning at dusk. The second prince was currently experiencing a severe headache. He felt as if he barely slept the night before, and the sudden intrusion from his balcony irritated him all the more. He narrowed his eyes at the figure clumsily climbing into his bedroom. He immediately sensed that the person was not dangerous due to their lack of discreetness. Zayden, a soft, gentle voice called out to him, stirring his heart. The second prince's expression was dark. He could not recall a single friend or acquaintance who would possibly address him this informally, especially since he didn't have any friends. However, the celestial figure before him was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. An angel, he whispered, his eyes widening in surprise. What? The woman frowned and walked towards him. Even though we left on a bad note yesterday, I came here to ask. Although Prince Zayden was entranced, he quickly snapped himself out of the daze. He interrupted her speech and pulled her against him, stealthily raising a knife against her throat. She was slightly taller, so Zayden stood on his toes to reach over. Why is a maiden like you in my chambers? He whispered into Celine's ear, sending a shiver down her back. Stop playing around. The crown prince ordered me to leave the palace by tomorrow. I'll explain in more detail later since I know this is sudden, but will you leave with me? Celine met Zayden's eyes that stared back at her blankly. There was no response from Zayden, and he didn't release his hold on her either. Zayden, Celine asked. She tilted her head, taken aback by the cold gaze that was directed at her for the first time. He must be really upset by my rejection. Calling a prince by his name will get you beheaded, my lady. I can kill you right now if I wanted tea. Celine slipped away from Zayden's grasp, much to his alarm. He never would have imagined that she knew martial arts and had loosened his grip. Stop messing with me. It's not funny. I'm serious right now, and I don't have much time left, she spoke sternly. She stretched her arm out to lightly slap him back to reality, yet Zayden blocked her incoming hand and twisted it, nearly breaking her wrists. What's wrong with you? Celine cradled her hand up close and stared incredulously at her friend. This was the first time Zayden had brought her physical pain. Even during their sword training days, he didn't dare touch her. I want to ask the same for you. You don't act or look like an assassin, despite climbing over the balcony. A noble would never act this recklessly, and you don't even resemble one either. You also act too friendly, calling me informally even though it's our first time meeting one another. Are you a foreign prostitute? Why go through great lengths to enter my bedroom? He stroked her hair fondly, intrigued by the unique color as if he had never seen silvery hair before. Will I have you for myself then? That's when Celine realized something was terribly amiss. No matter how mischievous the second prince was, he would never call her such a name. What's my name? Celine drew her words carefully, ignoring the way Zayden suggestively caressed her long locks. She was filled with dread, and couldn't register any of his actions. I don't know your name, he replied. He added with a smirk, why don't you tell me your name before I ravish you? Zayden leaned in closer, smiling pleasantly as he inhaled her rosy scent. He isn't joking. He doesn't remember me. This man is not her Zayden. Celine froze in terror at this sinking realization. She could barely register his seductive words, for she felt like throwing up. Why? She slumped to the floor. Why don't you remember me? What's going on? Who would do this? It's not funny. Why don't you stop speaking and pleasure me instead? Your words give me a headache. She looked up to see Zayden's hardened expression. He stared at her as if she was a stranger, a mere nuisance. It was clear that he only kept her near for her exquisite beauty. Prince Zayden was indeed intrigued by the lovely woman. He had never seen such unique features that were far different from the Zayenites. Her eccentric face did not match the Zayenate standard ideals, which the prince knew too well due to his own appearance. He felt as they shared similar experiences, which was a pleasant feeling. Perhaps they would get along well. As he began to approach her with a predatory gaze, Celine instinctively crawled away until her back was against the balcony. Don't say that, Celine spoke solemnly. The fierceness in her eyes startled Zayden. He frowned before laughing at her crudeness. Are you crying? I almost felt guilty from your expression, when I haven't even touched you yet. Don't you know that entering another man's chambers at such an hour is equivalent to offering yourself to me? The tears continued to stream down her cheeks. She whispered desperately, wishing that this was only a nightmare. Stop joking around, you're going too far, Celine whimpered. I can't lose you. Anyone but you. She erupted into a mental breakdown. You're the only one who actually knows me. How will I go on in this cruel world? The second prince furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. He attempted to move closer in order to comfort the crying woman, however he had never given anyone comfort before. He stood there awkwardly, reaching out to pat her back. Celine cried harder, knowing that Zayden truly didn't remember her anymore. If he did, he would have embraced her by now. The tears rushed down her cheeks, as she realized that Zayden would never be a part of her life again. Why are you crying? I'm mostly joking. Zayden ruffled his hair, completely baffled by the situation. How can you forget me? Celine whimpered, stopping Zayden in his tracks. She slapped his hands away and glared at him. Celine didn't want to leave, yet the man before her was not the person she once knew. If she stayed any longer, she would surely suffer the consequences. Draco escaped from her shadow and hissed, offended by the second prince too. He brushed against Celine to offer her comfort while glaring insidiously at the one who made her cry. I refuse to accept this as our fate. I will continue to cherish our memories. Please remember me, second prince. Remember and come find me. Celine smiled sadly and looked away from the prince. She slipped away from his bedroom as quickly as she had arrived, leaving the second prince in a precarious state. Chapter 50. Celine realized that the situation had turned dangerous, so she decided to leave secretly. If someone had wiped her away from Prince Zayden's memories, it could be the same for any of her friends. She was only relieved that Hala had left before this phenomenon. She continued to weep pathetically as she sat on Draco's back, who was currently in the form of a horse. A woman stopped in front of Celine, blocking her path. She strained her eyes and was surprised to see Lady Yasna, who was disheveled as if she had rushed to meet Celine. Yasna? What are you doing here? Celine asked dubiously. Her tears momentarily stopped as she took in her friend's bulging stomach. The baby would definitely be due soon. Before Lady Yasna could respond, her eyes widened as she looked past Celine and sensed an imminent danger. Yasna, get back here. It's dangerous. The scream belonged to Lady Yasna's husband, whom Celine could not see as she checked her surroundings. Yasna looked ahead in defiance and pushed Celine off the horse. Even Draco moved back in surprise to check on Celine. Then, an arrow whisked past Celine and pierced Yasna's heart. This event happened so quickly that Celine couldn't even react in time. She watched as Yasna fell with a thud, her eyes rolled back as her head hit the concrete floor. Yasna. Celine wheezed at the sight of her friend. She couldn't take her eyes off her dear friend, and the pool of blood beginning to form made her gag. Celine panted heavily, unable to breathe. Her sight had become blurry, and Celine felt the bile in her stomach making its way up. She barely felt her familiar transform into a dragon until she was dragged away by him. The onset of arrows couldn't penetrate Draco's skin, so they continued to safely fly upwards. She raised her eyes to the spot where Yasna had stared at, moments before her death. She saw the crown prince and his concubine. Prince Laith lifted his bow, directing his arrow towards her. Xavia seemed to smile while Sir Vigo slumped to the floor. However, as they witnessed her familiar's transformation, Xavia's smile twisted into a snarl. Even the crown prince paused, before resuming his stance and pulling another arrow. This was my sealed fate. I was supposed to die today, but I didn't die because of Yasna and Draco. Celine desperately clung to Draco's back as they flew where arrows couldn't reach them. She cried in pain as she had lost too many loved ones in one day. She cursed her luck and knew that someday she would return for revenge. Later in the evening. The night was strangely eerie. The emperor and crown prince sat beside one another around the long dining table filled with delicacies. Across from the table, a small woman with honey-colored eyes exuded an ominous aura. They seemed to be eating dinner, like a happy family. However, if one observed closely, they would see that only the woman seemed to enjoy the meal. The men across from her barely touched the food on their plate, their eyes empty as they took in each bite. Their bodies were stiff and pale, as if they were a hollow shell. The woman continued to smile and hum merrily as she even took some food off the emperor's plate. Chapter 51. 4 years later. Krastia's imperial palace was strategically constructed by the first emperor in order to incorporate landscape as a defense base, gain easier access to the ports, and stand gloriously near trade routes. The main palace was built from stone, residing near a densely forested mountain with high peaks. Many neighboring districts surrounded the palace, running lively markets and bi-monthly festivals. Secluded in the mountainous region was a 3-story building with a hip and gable roof. The building was particularly unique since it possessed Western influence. The nearby villagers were not aware of its construction until it was fully built. Because most of the districts consisted of single-story buildings separated by narrow lanes, the locals believed that the mansion belonged to the aristocrats. Since the mountain range included thick vegetation and hot springs, the residents inside that mansion would surely be living in paradise. The house was remotely built in the outskirts of the central capital, yet it was not too isolated from villagers. Soon enough, the residents came to know the owner of the house. It was Draco, the second richest man in the country, next to the emperor of course. He was rumored to live with his younger sister, although the sister had never made a public appearance before. Further away from the house were stone steps carved onto the side. These steps led to the heart of the mountain, where one could visit the hot springs and witness the scenic beauty of the high peaks. If a traveler strayed far from the path, they might even be lucky enough to catch a glimpse of a majestic creature. A white, serpentine figure crawled underneath the highest cliffs in its most glorious form. A human would only make up less than a quarter of the dragon's head. The dragon broke through the misty mountains and reached a slender woman who took small steps towards the hot springs. Celine. A pair of twins caught up to the woman, pulling on her sleeves to receive her attention. They were merely 10 years old, possessing similar Krastian features including black hair and almond-shaped eyes. One of the twins was noticeably more confident than the other. This twin was a young girl named Ichika. Ichika pushed her brother Iji to the side and held the woman's hand. "Can Draco play with us?" she asked shyly, while Iji furiously rubbed his arm in frustration. "You guys want to fly again?" Celine raised her eyebrow, glancing at the creature roaming freely. Emmett, the twins nodded in unison, eager to ride the dragon again. "Perhaps Draco can give us a ride back to the house once we finish bathing in the hot springs." Celine considered their question, then continued to walk upwards. "But we walk too far for a mere bath every day. Why do we need to bathe again and again?" The twins complained very frequently, especially since the long walks often made their smaller legs sore. "A clean person will never get sick. And a clean person showers once a day. Plus, the hot springs are rich with carbonates, which makes our skin feel soft and healthy." Celine smiled, and her skin was more radiant than when she first arrived in Krastia. The twins had also noticed that they were beginning to smell like her, which was a very pleasing change. Therefore, the twins could only agree and reluctantly trail behind her. Celine laughed lightly at the sight of the pouting children. They deeply resembled her late husband, which slightly warmed her heart at the thought of him. The twins were indeed the younger siblings of Zakai, the assassin who had stabbed Celine in the stomach a few years back. He was also the spitting image of her late husband. Once Celine had left the Zayden Empire, she had traveled to Krastia with Hala and Zakai. She offered him and his family refuge since he would be killed for failing to accomplish his task. Since then, Zakai, the twins, and their mother had been living in her estate too. Zakai also became her business partner and helped Draco negotiate or speak to the customers in Celine's stead. Although Zakai was deeply integrated into her life, she had long come to terms with the fact that he was not her late husband. She did, however, encourage the growing relationship between Hala and Zakai, believing that their descendants would one day give birth to her late husband. Celine hoped that perhaps they would exist in the future of this parallel world. 4 years had passed since then. Celine was now a 20-year-old woman who had escaped her tragic fate. She had fully grown into a tall, lean woman with an ample bosom. Her features remained the same, although her face had considerably narrowed as she lost the baby fat on her cheeks. One remarkable difference was Celine's hair, which had been dyed black in order to prevent any unwanted attention. Whenever she traveled to public spaces, she wore an eye patch to cover the gold in her eye. Nonetheless, she still stood out due to her height and facial features. Luckily, Celine didn't need to leave the mountains often, for she sent Draco and Zakai in her stead for business purposes. Not to mention, Celine grew her own food and spices. Through Draco, she earned a lot of money, continuing to invent goods and innovative new technology. Celine also acquired a new hobby, where young women commissioned her for makeovers and brought her a positive reputation in return. She only received business once in a blue moon, which wasn't much work at all. She had even decided to create a light bulb, although she never placed it in the market. Celine didn't want the world to enter the Industrial Revolution and further escalate climate change. Therefore, electricity was only used in her home and strictly kept a secret from outsiders. All in all, one could say that she had gone very far in her career as an engineer and businessman. Celine truly believed that she was a very lucky person. She was forever thankful for Draco and all the other friends in her life. She truly wouldn't have made it very far if it wasn't for them. After Celine and the children finished washing themselves, Draco morphed into a smaller dragon in order to take them back to the mansion. As they arrived at the front steps, the scent of meat filled their noses, making the twins drool. "Mom is cooking that dish tonight." They hastily entered their home, revealing a modern interior that Celine had carefully designed. Everyone seemed to gather around the wooden dining table after smelling the wonderful aroma. Even Draco had transformed into a human in order to enter the dining room. The mass production of toilet paper had been finalized and was ready to sell now. Although Zakai and Draco had contributed immensely, Celine had also hired unemployed locals who needed the extra money. It had taken many years to perfect the formula, yet she had finally accomplished her goal through the collaborative effort. Zakai's mother wanted to reward everyone for the accomplishment, so she cooked a special meal in celebration. There was an assortment of side dishes surrounding the bigger plates of expensive meat. Celine smiled as the lively table quickly became filled with jokes and laughter, and the mansion was soon brimming with life. She had never felt such a heartwarming atmosphere even in her previous life. The food in her mouth was savory and flavorful, yet eating with loved ones left a sweet, lingering taste in her mouth. "Since we're celebrating like this, let's go to the festival tonight," Ichika mumbled with a mouthful of food. "Yes, you should go. I'll guard the house while you guys are gone." Celine smiled and wiped the pieces of food around her lips, patting her head affectionately. "You should come with us this time," Hala pouted. "You've never been to one of these festivals despite living here for so long. You would love this event. It is much more fun than the night market in Nor." "Not tonight, I already washed myself." Celine politely declined and resumed eating. However, she still squirmed as she realized that the conversation was far from over. "That's fine, let's go tomorrow then. This festival happens to be a 2-day event." Zakai smiled mischievously, and Celine frowned. "But I stand out too much. I will only be a burden," she complained. Zakai's mother firmly pointed her utensil towards Celine. "It will be a waste if no one witnesses your beauty. You must go and find a man." "Although no one is good enough for our Celine," Hala pitched in. Everyone nodded in agreement. Eventually, Celine succumbed to their wishes and agreed to visit the festival. "It's better to go tomorrow. My friend said that the Emperor will be joining our town festival tomorrow. Maybe we can finally take a glimpse at our son," Eg remarked curiously. "Ouch, why would you hit me?" Ichika pinched her brother in annoyance. She quickly checked to see Celine's reaction, who had stilled. Ichika sighed, wanting to punch her dense little brother. She dragged him underneath the table and hissed, "You're not supposed to mention the Emperor in this house or Celine will be sad. So shut up and don't say anything if you're going to be like this." Although Ichika was older by a couple of minutes, Eiji was extremely terrified as he nodded obediently. He couldn't help but shed a single tear from being scolded. He was too scared to ask why the Emperor shouldn't be mentioned in front of Celine when he was the ruler of Krastia. However, he suppressed his curiosity down to avoid a beating. They climbed back to their seats, although everyone had already heard the twins whisper under the table. Hala gulped as the dining room became slightly awkward. After dinner, Celine left to visit the mansion's backyard. Draco had built walls surrounding their mansion in order to keep out intruders. Within the walls was a spacious amount of land, so Celine decided to plant vegetables, fruit trees, and even a flower garden. She walked towards the far corner of the wall, away from the garden and crops. There was a memorial stone underneath a small pavilion. Celine placed a purple, jasmine flower next to the stone. She chose jasmine since it reminded her of an old friend. "I miss you a little more tonight, Yasna. Today I was reminded of the past. Chapter 52. Not long after Celine settled in Krastia, rumors of Emperor Memories I's death reached her ears. Although the successor of the Zayden Empire was said to be promising and wise, Celine doubted that this would be the case. She clenched her fists, recalling the wicked smile planted on Xavier's lips as Leith pulled an arrow and pierced a pregnant woman. The memory of Xavier's smile was engraved in mind, and Celine's mind had clicked just then. Xavier was the root of Leith's cruel change in demeanor and was most likely the cause of Zayden's memory loss too. On a moral standpoint, it was logical for Celine to plan her return and save the princes. However, Celine was a coward with many fears. She simply never wanted to return for revenge. This life wasn't a fairy tale, and each human had their limits. There were too many risks, and Celine refused to risk Draco's life when she was living well in Krastia. She was also wary of Red, who could easily burn her and Draco to ashes if Zayden refused to side with her. Anyways, Zayden would live well without Celine, especially since he didn't remember her anyways. Celine didn't want to be blinded by hate and revenge either, so she decided to move on. Yasna wouldn't have wanted Celine to harbor such grudges and ruin her own life. Therefore, she wanted to live well for Yasna. She hoped that Sir Vigos would do the same. However, Draco always informed Celine with details of the second prince. She couldn't help but keep tabs on him. That's how she heard about the infamous love triangle between Xavier, Leith, and Zayden. After the crown prince had saved Xavier from the slums, the second prince had foolishly fallen for Xavier's charm. He often frequented her residence, peering at the doors of her chambers with eyes filled with longing. Celine attentively listened to this story, wondering if Xavier's residence was Celine's chambers. She often wondered if the original story was similar to this timeline. Perhaps the original Celine had been close to the second prince and visited him on that fateful day. Perhaps she was persistent and refused to leave, which led to her own demise. His loss of memory could only benefit Xavier, who Zayden was destined to love. This was why Celine believed that the concubine was the reason for the past, strange occurrences. She was the only character who Celine was wary of. How did Xavier erase his memories? Is Xavier a witch? If she's a witch, can the spell be reversible? She was filled with many pointless questions, ones where she would probably never receive answers to. Celine also wasn't sure if Xavier had truly brainwashed the princes. It was only a speculation. Therefore, she tried not to contemplate this thought often. On the other hand, if Celine's speculations were supposedly true, then Xavier wasn't completely successful with whatever spell or brainwashing method she had used. Now that she looked back, Celine always assumed Leith was bipolar after the war. The crown prince's emotions had often seeped through his actions too, revealing mood swings and rampant emotions. When Leith had returned from war, he had treated her coldly and seemed to love the concubine. However, he often surprised Celine with his goodwill and mixed signals. The more she thought about it, she would be more convinced that his last speech was a confession of his honest feelings mixed in with Xavier's brainwashing thoughts. He said he loved me unconditionally with tears in his eyes, yet he had completely contradicted those words by calling Xavier his one and only. Celine wouldn't have given a second thought about this transition, especially since one can move on from their past love and still be sentimental. However, Leith's tone had been off when praising Xavier. He sounded as if he was forcing the words out, resembling a robotic voice. When Leith looked at Celine, he looked as if he was still in pain. In fact, Celine was definitely sure that Leith was void of emotion the day of her departure. She knew that the real crown prince would have been ridden with guilt after killing an innocent noblewoman. However, he continued to shoot arrows with indifferent eyes. This was all suspicious to her, since Leith was often an emotional man and driven to be a great emperor. Meanwhile, whatever purpose Xavier had in store for the second prince was unsuccessful, for he ran away. Soon after the emperor's death, the second prince fled the country and seized Krastia's throne. He had changed his name to Akihiko and rebelled against the Zayden Empire. Because of his powerful familiar and cunning military strategies, Krastia had won. The Zayyanites weren't at a complete loss since their lands stretched farther than any empire. However, this opposing side retreated for the time being. Through Akihiko's victory, he earned the support of Krastia. Celine vividly remembered the country celebrating for months on end for their newfound freedom. The country was not wary of the new emperor at all since Akihiko possessed the royal blood of Krastia from his mother. The villagers even acknowledged and deeply respected the new emperor since the land began to stabilize and prosper under him. Draco also earned the respect of this country because he provided resources for the emperor. Through Draco, Celine improved Krastia's economy and vegetation. Because of her, the country was rich with crops and clean water. Emperor Akihiko acknowledged their work and gave him an official title. This was not a bad thing for Celine, especially since onlookers wouldn't dare disturb their mansion anymore due to their prestigious title. Celine smiled as she thought of Akihiko again. Although their memories only existed within her, she still felt proud of the boy. Akihiko's dragon had become a symbol of hope and sovereignty for the people. The people felt secure and proud of their emperor as dragons were considered to be sacred. He was truly loved by all and coined as the pride of the country. Akihiko was often nicknamed as the Sun, which was fairly ironic since he had been labeled as the opposite in Nor. Recently, Akihiko had become a source of gossip since he was still a handsome bachelor. Many women attempted to aim for the empty seat beside him and failed. These bitter women lamented Xavier, who was believed to be their emperor's unrequited first love. Xavier is a lucky bitch, Achika would recite the words of the women she heard in the markets. Celine sighed heavily, somewhat feeling injustice. Her name was pitied by people and often ridiculed while Xavier had become infamous for her charm. She stood in front of the pavilion for a longer time than necessary, thinking about this and that until Draco eventually found her again. He nuzzled her and she held him close. "You can't leave me, Draco. Others may enter and leave my life as they please, but not you," Celine whispered. Life had been fairly difficult for Celine. Besides the tragedy in her previous life, Yasna and Zayden were both ripped away from her in the blink of an eye. There were many sleepless nights as she recalled Yasna's lifeless body and Zayden's cold gaze. However, Celine lived peacefully now. The new chapter in her life had been filled with fortunes and warm memories from the household. She wished she could continue to live this way and not lose anyone else. Chapter 53. Same hour, in the main palace of Krastia. The newly renovated throne room satisfied Emperor Akihiko's taste. The palace was set within massive stone walls and elevated off the ground with stone steps. The palace itself was decorated with thatched roofs and a dark interior. Behind the sliding panels and folding screens of a particularly lavish courtroom, a beautiful man sat on a cushioned seat. He wore a silk robe with a large dragon embroidered on the back. It hung around his shoulders loosely, revealing his white trousers and sculpted body. The emperor had concluded his meeting with dignitaries who detailed the plan for the following festival held tomorrow night. The new emperor was fond of such festivities. The smoky and loud atmosphere was somehow a nostalgic experience for him. The emperor also frequented the village to appreciate their acceptance to the new ruler. They respected Akihiko not only for his competency as leader, but for his lean physique and soft, facial features. This was a complete contrast from the way he was treated in Zionite Empire. Due to his popularity, many officials pushed their daughters towards the emperor in hopes of earning his attention. Despite the lack of concubines in his harem and the vacant spot for the empress, he was still rumored to be a womanizer due to his charismatic charm. Presently, a young woman graced the emperor's hall as the dignitaries took in a sharp breath. She was 16 years old, yet she held the title for the most beautiful woman in Krastia. With silky black hair and a perfectly round face, she was the epitome of a beautiful Krastian woman. "Your Majesty, I present to you my daughter." A man knelt to the floor in reverence, flaunting his purple robe to symbolize his highest-ranking status. Because he was the highest-ranking official, Yua was the most qualified noblewoman in Krastia and the strongest candidate for the empress seat, not to mention her unforgettable beauty and intelligence. Now that she had come of age, she was brought to the palace immediately. As the empress, her father would secure his status and his influence would increase. Previously linked to the late emperor, she had been far too young for the empress position. As she observed the new emperor before her, she was thankful for her past circumstances. She kneeled with elegance, her ceremonial dress stretching out like petals. Her pride and confidence oozed from her smile. She was no gentle lotus. This headstrong woman was spoiled and received whatever she desired. The emperor motioned her forward, and she was ushered to his side. Emperor Akihiko lifted Yua's chin to observe her more closely, and the woman flushed crimson at his handsome features. Her body felt warm, for she had never seen such a beautiful man in her entire life. "They say you're the most beautiful woman in Krastia," he finally commented. "Ah yes, my daughter is not only beautiful, but she is also educated in the arts and well-versed with poetry." Both Yua and her father beamed with delight at his words. "I am honored to hear such compliments from the wise Emperor of Krastia. Your Majesty." She lowered her eyes and bowed deeply. A middle-aged man who also wore a purple robe stood to the side, frowning. He was Akihiko's most trusted advisor. He clenched his jaw, wincing from the humiliation that this proud woman would experience soon enough. He had served the emperor for many years and had inevitably acquired the keen ability to understand his thoughts. The emperor had not complimented Yua's beauty. In fact, he had simply stated the rumors surrounding that woman, and the emperor's indifferent eyes meant that he did not agree with her title. He braced himself for the retaliation, and sure enough, the emperor called for his name. "Vigos, this woman has excelled in her studies and boasts with confidence. It leads me to think she has accomplished many feats. What has she done for Krastia?" The emperor smiled haughtily. "She has not achieved any accomplishments, Your Majesty." Sir Vigos replied strongly, although his palms were sweaty from the opposing side's glare. Because Yua's father had not earned the new emperor's favor as of yet, his position was threatened by Sir Vigos. There was uneasy tension as Sir Vigos continued to account for Yua's lack of participation even within the social circles. Although Yua was considered the flower of Krastia, she had committed many misdeeds and harmed multiple servants. She reigned the social circles amongst women in fear, rather than coaxing them to her side. Therefore her name had become tarnished when the previous emperor passed away. She was no longer the daughter of the highest official, for Sir Vigos held the spot now. "Has she displayed any technical skills that will ensure her competency as head of the inner palace?" the emperor probed. Sir Vigos shook his head, glancing at the bashed woman apologetically. "You are an intelligent woman with many connections, yet you have done nothing for my country. You want to be my wife, but shouldn't you at least be qualified to lead the country with me?" The emperor raised his eyebrows, and Yua squirmed, shaken by the sudden criticism. Her face had turned a darker shade of red from humiliation. The surrounding nobles coughed at his sudden remark, and the air was filled with awkward silence. Yua's delicate smile faltered before she mustered up her courage again. How can a woman accomplish such a difficult task? A woman should be obedient and submit to their husband. A woman's role is to practice proper speech, modesty, and morality. The men in the room nodded in agreement, seemingly agreeing with Yua. However, the relief was short-lived, for the emperor stared darkly at her. Yua was not wrong. Women were bound to their husbands. However, the emperor had been taught differently. He had been told that women may be physically smaller, but they were equally intelligent as men. Akihiko had also been told to only keep one woman by his side, never accepting mistresses into his bed. He clicked his tongue in frustration, unable to recall the face of the tutor who had instilled this principle. He decided not to rebuke Yua's words, for her father was a respected man. However, he didn't want to deal with the woman anymore and simply nodded, motioning her to leave. Chapter 54. After Yua left reluctantly, another woman presented herself to the emperor. Emperor Akihiko sighed deeply, and didn't bother to accept her greetings either. As she moved closer to the emperor, he whipped his head up in alarm. His reaction startled many onlookers, including Sir Vigos. The woman's rosy scent filled his nose. The smell was strangely familiar, and he was overwhelmed with how nostalgic and soothing he felt. He roughly pulled her towards him and inhaled the nape of her neck. The woman blushed in surprise at his show of favor, thrilled by the suggestive gestures. He surveyed the small figure before him, taking in her delicate features, which was similar to the previous woman. Her wrapped front garment was sumptuously lavish, with elaborate embroidery around the silky fabric. Her appearance was completely unfamiliar to Akihiko, and her name had been forgotten by him already. Despite not recalling the woman's name, the emperor invited her to his chambers that night, which was something he had never done before. It seemed as if he had approved of this woman. The word spread like wildfire, and soon enough, the entire capital knew of this occurrence. The emperor finally accepted a woman. When the pair was finally alone, he addressed her calmly. "Your fragrance. You smell like roses." He didn't know how he knew of this scent. However, he couldn't help but be drawn to the smell and embrace it. What was wrong with him? Yes, it's from the market. Do you like it, Your Majesty? Emperor Akihiko didn't respond. Instead, he pulled her closer, setting her delicate body onto his lap. He embraced her carefully, gently tracing her neck with his hands. As the woman leaned closer to his face, her cheeks were inflamed. He noticed immediately and frowned. The emperor suddenly didn't want to be near this woman anymore, disgusted by her close proximity. He abruptly drew away, snapping out of his own trance. He pushed her off of his lap, realizing that he had been momentarily seduced by her scent. Who sold this to you? Specifically, what was their name? He demanded. My perfume. The woman was bewildered by his sudden rejection, trying to collect herself before she could reply. I can't remember. I do know his name means dragon, though. Oh, it was Draco, the woman squeaked as she recalled the strange man. Lord Draco? Akihiko paused. The one who helped improve Krastia's economy and provided me with many resources? He convinced me to purchase his goods after informing me that the legendary beauty of Noor wore this specific scent. She rambled on about the beauty of Noor, describing her silver-white appearance in admiration. How can such a woman exist? Helena? He stilled, staring at the woman strangely. Meanwhile, the woman was unaware of the emperor's change in mood, nor was she aware of the connection between the emperor and the rose-scented perfume. She was a rather simple person, not educated or well-informed of such significant details. She continued to ramble foolishly, wondering when their first night would resume. However, the emperor's expression only darkened until it became noticeably menacing. And do you know what happened to this legendary beauty of Noor? He finally questioned. No, Your Majesty. She was a foolish woman, driven out of the country because of her madness. She widened her eyes in surprise. Was she brazenly wearing the scent of a crazy woman in front of the emperor? Your Majesty, Do you know what country I grew up in? I am not quite sure. She stumbled back, frightened by his harsh tone. She was suffocating from the dark air surrounding the emperor. Noor. The scent you shamelessly wear was worn by the crown princess, my brother's woman. The woman paled as she took in the emperor's wicked smile. It took a long moment for the woman to understand his words, and her eyes flickered in panic once the realization dawned on her. Your Majesty, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know. The woman shook in horror, shaken by her grave mistake. She lowered her forehead to the cold floor, shivering in fear. You didn't know that we are currently at war with the Zaydenites and accepted their goods. I have committed a sin, Your Majesty. Please spare me. The woman groveled on the floor, begging for the emperor's mercy. However, she was eventually pulled away by his men and ushered away, like all the other women who failed to capture his interest. The emperor was deep in thought as the commotion was handled by Sir Vigos. The emperor's right-hand man had expected this outcome and wasn't surprised as he watched the pitiful woman be dragged away. He had already prepared for the mess and provided an escort for the woman ahead of time. He walked into the emperor's chambers and paid respects to Akihiko. He was surprised to see the sullen expression on the emperor, who was spread out on his bed, looking up at the elaborate patterns on the ceiling. Tell me, Vigos, what was Helena like? Helena? Yes. You had previously informed me that Helena was your late wife's closest companion. Surely you would know what she was like then. Sir Vigos' expression seemed to shatter. His face crumbled as he smiled sadly. My greatest regret was not paying enough attention to my dear wife. I was blinded by my own greed and never asked about her friendships. I am sorry, Your Majesty, but all I know is that my wife loved her as she would a sister. Since she is a great judge of character, I am sure that Helena was a wonderful person. Emperor Akihiko gave Sir Vigos an odd look. After Vigos' wife had passed away, he had pledged himself to the second prince. He had lost all ambition and greed, yet his hatred towards the crown prince never washed away. Lending his experience and skills, Akihiko successfully left the Zaydite Empire and succeeded Krastia's throne. This was part of Sir Vigos' plan for vengeance. He waited patiently for the opportunity to crush the Zaydite Empire and personally kill his wife's murderers. Emperor Akihiko never understood Sir Vigo's complicated expression. If he didn't care about his wife when she was alive, why did he care now? Sir Vigos ignored his emperor's watchful eyes and continued. Your Majesty, it's been many years since you ascended the throne. If you continue to reject every woman, there will no longer be any candidates left. Please consider a consort or concubine, Your Majesty. I am concerned for the foot. I understand that I must choose an empress and name a successor in order to secure the throne we usurped. Emperor Akihiko interrupted. However, you shouldn't be the one to remind me, for you haven't accepted a wife either. Sir Vigos was Emperor Akihiko's most trusted advisor, which made him quite popular amongst the women. He was also a well-built, chiseled man from the Middle East. Many women swooned at his striking appearance. However, Sir Vigos' heart only held room for Yasna, and he never accepted another woman. His late wife had also left him a daughter, who had miraculously survived that fateful day. He raised his daughter with the utmost care, and had no time to spare other women a glance when his hands were always filled. I am sure that you must attend to your child now that it is very late in the evening. You may go. The emperor dismissed his friend, not wanting to hear his objections. He had originally wanted to ask Vigos about Draco, who seemed to have a connection with Kalina and Nor. For now, he wasn't a threat to Krastia, so there was no need to investigate now. The emperor also wanted to investigate their relationship on his own too. Yes, Your Majesty. Sir Vigos deepened his bow before turning away. He paused, wondering if he should ask if the memories of Kalina were slowly returning. Then Sir Vigos quickly stopped himself. My daughter is waiting. He scolded himself and rushed out.